Hey everybody, tonight I want to talk about the surviving roommates in the Idaho 4 case, Dylan and Bethany, and share with you what I think occurred in those early morning hours after the murders happened. Now, as I'm sure most of you know, there were two roommates who survived the attacks, Bethany and Dylan. Now, one roommate in particular has been the subject of a lot of discussion recently because it's presumed that she may have heard the attacks happening and even saw the suspect fleeing the house, but yet we didn't have a 911 call until 11:58 a.m. So that's just about 7.5 hours from the end of the murders until 911 was called. So this unknown that we have of what occurred between 4:25 and 11:58 has kind of evolved into all sorts of different theories about Dylan and her involvement in the case. Anywhere from she's involved in drug sales or she was hiding drug evidence in the house after the murders occurred. I've even heard that she may have known Brian and was selling drugs to him. I've heard a rumor that she may have hired a hitman to attack one of the victims because she wanted to get revenge or had some personal vendetta against one of them, which I don't think it would be the case considering everything we know about their relationships. I've heard the angle of it being a revenge for hazing in some way, but there's really been a lot of different things out there flying around about Dylan, and not as much really about Bethany, the other surviving roommate, right? I really think that's an important part of this whole puzzle, is remembering that there is another person there who was a close witness. Now, I do think that most likely Bethany slept through the attacks and didn't really hear as much as what Dylan heard, but I think that when she did wake up that morning, she played a very important part in how things unfolded that morning once they realized what was happening in the house. I'm going to focus mostly on Dylan for this video because this is the person who's been being talked about the most, so I want to address this part of the case, but I think this does tie into the other roommate, Bethany, as well. What I can tell based off of all of that social media that's out there of pictures of her with Kaylee and Maddie, it seems to me like they were all pretty good friends and pretty close. There's really nothing out there to show that she would have had any personal issue with anybody in the house. Any theory out there about Dylan being involved in the actual murders, in my opinion, doesn't make any sense at all. So I'm going to move past that thought pretty quick and focus more on the drug angle that's being discussed. Kaylee's family and their attorney has also been supportive to Dylan. I think part of why Kaylee's family's attorney wants the gag order released is so that they can help dispel these rumors that are going around about what happened between 4:30 and 11:58. I think there is more information about that time frame that they're keeping close and they're not releasing, and that could be frustrating some of the families, and they want things to kind of quiet down so that they can focus on the next phase of the trial that's coming up in June. So like I said, I personally don't think that Dylan or Bethany are involved in the attacks on the victims in any way. Law enforcement has also ruled them out, and they know a lot more than we do, and they've known a lot more for a long time. So I think if there was anything there that would show an involvement with them and the murders, it would have been uncovered by now. So that kind of leaves us with the other angle of, okay, maybe there was a different reason other than that. Like if maybe Dylan was hiding drug evidence, or if there was drug sales going on from the house, it may have had something to do with that. I mean, it would take a smoking gun in order to connect her to the actual murders. So if you're going to think that she's involved in any kind of cover-up, most likely I think that you would be leaning on the idea that it had something to do with drugs. So I've done my best to try to find a connection on drug sales from the house, and I haven't had much luck with that. Now, I have come across some people who have told me that they personally are aware of drugs being sold from the house. Now, I do think that that's possible, that there could be an occasional transfer of drugs when you're talking about frat and sorority houses and a college environment. Everybody knows that people at that age are experimenting. I think that is a big difference though from a house being kind of what you would call a drug house, right? So there's certain things that you would expect to see in that type of a house which I couldn't uncover. And keep in mind, there's a lot of social media footage out there of inside the house, of all of these girls hanging out, photos, and really nowhere are you seeing any kind of glamorization of drugs or in the background anybody who appears to be using drugs. Everything looks pretty normal as far as it being kind of a party frat house. The other thing I kind of thought about when I heard somebody talking about possible sales from the house is there's a vacant room in the home. So there could definitely have been somebody else in the home prior who maybe had more involvement with that. Realistically, there's certain things you would expect to see in the background or hear about in regards to that kind of thing going on in an excessive way in a sorority house. Drug sales in this type of environment are typically a smaller circle of people, kind of a word of mouth, a friend hooking up a friend, hooking up a friend, and it kind of makes its way through that circle. But very rarely do you see a house like this that's actually dealing out drugs on a regular basis. And if we're going to say Dylan would have been involved in that, she's kind of the newbie here in the house, finding her way here as a college student, looking up to these other girls. It just doesn't fit to me that she would be somebody who is regularly dealing out of this house, other than what you would just hear about in a normal college town environment. And don't forget, we have to keep that connection of there are two roommates involved here. So if one roommate is in this kind of lifestyle and took this time to cover things up, the other roommate would most likely be aware of that. So you're really having to kind of tie both of them in on any type of cover up that may have happened. The odds of two young women like this being involved in a cover up like that would be very, very rare. Think about that. They would have to be conscious of what just happened in the house and the fact that there were 4 bodies lying in their bedrooms, and despite that would have taken this time to somehow thought that covering up the drug use was more important. That they would be in this mind state that they would get in trouble because of the drugs when the homicide detectives showed up. Now, I don't know how many of you have been around that type of environment. I can tell you though that there is a very distinguishable smell in situations where you have a large amount of blood present. And based off of the description of what happened in that house, I'm pretty confident that those girls would have smelled a very uncomfortable smell during that time period of cleaning up. Now, if you have two people who just witnessed this happen to their friends, and if they could keep themselves together in order to clean up all of these things and do some sort of cover up here, I don't know how many people out there could actually tell themselves and be honest that you would be able to handle that and do that in that type of situation. So I am in the camp that I don't think Dylan or Bethany were involved in the murders in any way, and I don't think they were involved in any type of cover-up. I'm going to show you now what I do think happened in those early hours after the murders occurred, and a lot of it has to do with what Dylan would have witnessed, and I'm going to show you that from her perspective, peering out her door in the middle of the night. Now really quick, I do want to show you Bethany's bedroom is right here if you're looking at this from the front of the house. And then if we look at the floor plan here, Bethany's room would be here on the right. Now this would be directly below the living room, which is on the second floor. So you can see here where you would come in the front door, immediately turn left and go upstairs to the living room. But if you come in and go down that hallway, that would lead you to where Bethany's room was. So she would have been on the opposite side of the house from where Ethan and Xana were. Here's a view of the stairs that lead up to the living room and the hallway that leads to Bethany's bedroom. Now this is the first floor of the house, and you can see here on the left is the front door that leads into the home. Now here's a view of the living room on the second floor, and down that hallway where you see that open door would be Ethan and Xana's room, and that's where they were discovered. Ethan and Xana's room was a very small room overall. Now this door right here near the staircase would be Dylan's bedroom door. So she's just opposite of the wall from the living room here. So again, Ethan and Xana's room over here on the right, and then the hallway here that goes up the stairs. You can see Dylan's bedroom door right there. Now let's take a look at how this would look at night in the dark. So this right here would have been what Brian would have seen as he was making his escape toward the kitchen back door, when Dylan would have been peering out of her doorway at him as he crossed through this threshold. I believe Dylan was still in her room and just had her door slightly open when she saw Brian pass by. Now this view right here would be what Dylan was actually looking at as she peered out her door and saw Brian coming toward her. I think that she probably had that door slightly cracked and was looking out, and as he came by, she stayed as still as she could so that he wouldn't notice her, hoping that he would pass by, rather than alerting him by slamming her door and attempting to lock it. And now here's a view of what it would have looked like to Dylan in the light as Brian came around the corner where this red arrow is from Ethan and Xana. I think this view really puts in perspective how close Dylan was to these attacks, and I am pretty confident that Dylan heard what was happening to Ethan and Xana and was more aware of what was occurring, and this really factors into why she reacted the way she did after the crimes. And if we look down here on the floor, we can see where the alleged footprint was found as the suspect was fleeing the house. Now this is a view of the inside of Dylan's bedroom. You can see there where the door would have been that she would have been peering out of and would have had to have locked quickly. This is her window that would lead to the back side of the house where that tree line is. And this is a view of what she would have been seeing once again as she was peering out her door and seeing Brian pass by while he was escaping after encountering Ethan and Xana in their bedroom just around this corner. Everybody, I think Dylan heard what happened, and I think she started going into a state of severe traumatic shock. There are multiple doctors out there that have written and talk about what happens to somebody when they experience these type of events. Your brain resorts to this adaptive defense mechanism when it's trying to cope with stressful or overwhelming events that it can't prevent or escape. Shock essentially helps reduce your awareness of your physical or emotional pain by dulling your senses, making you numb, and reducing your conscious cognizance of the event. Now, there's a wide range of symptoms, both physical and emotional, that somebody can experience. You can experience some of these or none of these, but these emotional symptoms here, I think, are very telling when we think of trying to logically figure out why Dylan and Bethany would not have called 911 sooner. Now, if we're going to also speculate that it's possible Dylan was selling drugs or was covering something up, it's possible that she also was the unconscious person that they had called about, and she was experiencing some of these physical symptoms of the shock. But despite the physical side, I think more importantly we have to look at the emotional symptoms of what happens. And so some of the things that would happen in a situation where you just heard and then saw your friends dead in the house could definitely result in somebody experiencing denial, panic, anxiety, confusion, disorientation. There's a lot of things that happen to somebody when they experience something like a crime, a severe accident, abuse. All of those things can create these symptoms of emotional trauma. So keeping that in mind, that leads us to a specific type of traumatic shock called dissociative shock. This is where a traumatic event can cause a person to go into shock and disconnect from either themselves or the people around them. People who experience dissociative shock may feel disconnected from reality, suffer memory loss, or develop dissociative disorder. Everybody, this is the same thing that causes PTSD. It's very, very possible that Dylan will suffer from a form of PTSD as a result of what occurred in that house. I think Dylan heard a good portion of the attack and was aware of what was happening, and those events then led into her stumbling upon even more evidence of what had happened and really pushed her over the edge. And she was experiencing a very strong form of traumatic shock until Bethany woke up, came upstairs, found her, and from there helped get help to the house, and things unfolded from there with the 911 call. I think we have a lot more evidence pointing to traumatic shock than we do Dylan being involved in some sort of criminal cover-up in the murder of her very good friends and sorority sisters. You'd have to have multiple people involved in that, and the odds of everybody being involved in that and keeping quiet with law enforcement not finding that connection is very, very slim. Despite all of the talk out there about all of these shady things that could have been going on, we really don't have any evidence connecting anything to that. But we do have evidence of what happens to people in traumatic situations. Is it possible that these victims didn't handle things perfectly on the mornings after the murder? Absolutely. But does that mean that there's something sinister behind it? I don't think so. Thanks everybody for watching. Most importantly, I want to hear what you think in the comments below. And please don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon. I also want to say thank you to my channel members who have joined the Precinct. I'll be scheduling our next live discussion next week. I can't wait to see you there.